Got about 37 minutes left this morning. And if you're not aware of, I'm doing double duty this week. I'm filling in for Benito on AM Idaho and then doing the show. And not only am I trying to get to the fair on Friday, but the goal is to get there sometime ahead of schedule because I wanted to get out and walk the grounds before it got started as people were setting up. Because they love to be interviewed while they're trying frantically to get set up. But I did this last year where I went out and I walked around the grounds and I just found people at random and got a chance to speak to them about what they were doing. Now I have a ticket anyway for myself just to go on my own later in the week because when you're a kid you want to go to the. I remember all I wanted to do was go to the two things. I was going to say one, but two things. Number one, and I referenced this the other day on the air. I don't even know if it still exists, but the Joey Chitwood Thrill Show used to travel the country back when I was a boy, and I think the original Joey was still alive. And they used to take these old El Caminos and they would drive them up ramps and then they would spin them around through flaming hoops and then land them on ramps on the other side. And there was always a good demolition derby, too. The fair was like Christmas in summer. And so we would go see that. And it was also an opportunity to get on some of the rides. And I was very young at the time, so most of those rides weren't what you'd call the neck breaking kind. But as I got older, of course, that became more and more important. And we used to have a little town near where I grew up called Rushford. And they would have a 1 day fair and carnival on Labor Day. It was always bittersweet because we had to go back to school after Labor Day. And number two, we'd go there to watch the parade in the morning. Then we'd go over to the carnival grounds. And my Uncle John would grab me. He didn't have any boys of his own. He'd grab me and drag me off to watch the horse pulls with him. And I think I've mentioned this on the air before, too. You know what it's like when you're standing there watching, and I like horses, but watching them pull weight around, when all you can hear in the background is all of that carnival music, doo doo doo, doo. And I knew my sister and brother and all my cousins were over there, and they were going on the tilt-a-whirl and the paratrooper and all of those things, and I'm watching the horse pulls with Uncle John. But I loved my Uncle John. I never dared say, "Well, I don't want to be here." So I'd stand there and tell him how much of a good time I was having, whether or not I was. I guess that was my first foray into politics. 926, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 63. You're up next. You're on air.
Bill, good morning. To deviate from the fair, in the Old West, they used to have public hangings, and everybody went to the public hanging, and I think that was a deterrent for the children. The next thought is we do so much to preserve and protect all of our data on the internet, on our computers, and everything else, yet we're not protecting our children from Satan. You look at all the movies that are coming out of Hollywood, how much money they're making, the Satan clubs. We need to do more to protect the children.
Well, now that we don't believe in, I mean, the surveys are just, they're showing such a drop off just in, it wasn't, first it was church attendance, but that doesn't mean much. Thank you for the call. A lot of people still believe strongly, but there's some reason that they've left the church. They're uncomfortable. Something didn't go well for them there, but they still believed. But not only are we now seeing that drop off, we're seeing a drop off in just belief altogether, especially among these younger folks. And you can say your public schools have done a good job telling them maybe it's not overt where they say God stuff, don't believe in that, that's just a bunch of baloney. Yeah, you can forget that. And so's Santa Claus, and they're both coming from somebody's imagination. Might not be quite that direct, but that's what they've been telling them in the schools for years, and trying to sell them on that point. And that's why we're here right now. But I'll never forget, I was watching an interview with John Ratzenberg. You remember he played Cliff Clavin. Hey, Sammy, what's going on today? He was on Bill O'Reilly's program. And, of course, he's not so ditzy in real life. And he's a very devout Christian. And he mentioned that his kids always had to go to church when they were little. And he said, well, how did your liberal co-stars feel about all of this? And he said, well, nobody really gave me a hard time about it, at least not among the regulars. But he said, if they did, I always told them, if you raise your kids to believe nothing, they'll grow up to believe anything. That's where we're at. That's the critical problem. You're up next. We got about a minute before the break. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Uh, Most of the people, even here in the Magic Valley, don't pay attention to what's going on around them. Here just recently, I went to Boise and I stopped at the rest area on top of the hill there, and I went in to use the restroom, and all the signs are changed in there. It's got a man and woman. There's no individuals, no more. Now, I never seen anything, any place in the paper where they was
Wow.
asking the people if they wanted to change the signs in there.
Wow.
And
Huh.
uh, the people don't pay attention. Now, somebody had to make that decision to print those there signs and put them all over the restroom. Same thing with your public schools. We took our granddaughter out and put her in private school because we went and looked at the curriculum that they're teaching in Twin Falls School District. There's nothing there that what you went to school with or what I went to school with.
And
And
it's only going to
that's
get
what the
worse.
people need to do is just quit sending their children to public schools, put them in a private school, church school, whatever it happens to be. They lose their money. Twin Falls County take their big buildings and either cohere to the public or lose their school. They won't have the teachers there to even
Well, we've
teach
got to
them.
let
They
you
could
go
do
on
it.
that thought because we got a hard break. More coming up. Just some sad news to pass along in this segment of the program, if I could. I would pot down the music there for that reason. In AM Idaho this morning, we had mentioned the fact that there had been a man from Twin Falls who was injured in a motorcycle accident. He was trying to get on the on ramp to the highway on I 84 West yesterday near Burley and lost control, and the bike went across the road. And he of course, ended up skidding across the road himself, and he was taken to a hospital in Pocatello. He has since died. His name was Jerry Weeks, Jerry D. Weeks from here in Twin Falls. He was 38. We'll have more details on that. You can find more details, in fact, on our website. We'll have more on the news coming up, too, at 10 o'clock this morning, just following Fox. Just a note, he was not wearing a helmet at the time of the accident. I'm not one of those people who demands people wear seatbelts or helmets, and I think if you're over 18, you probably should have some of these choices to make on your own. But it does give you a message for those who don't wear a helmet that there can be some dangers involved, especially when you're traveling at high speeds. Uh, Head injuries, especially, are nothing to sneeze at. 9:35. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. And speaking of your health, we're going to pick up with a topic tomorrow that we were on last week with the folks from Trip Family Medicine. Physician assistant Russell Singleton will be joining us again in studio tomorrow morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We had talked about Louisiana and Italy last week and what people need to know about medical preparedness. We didn't get to some aspects though. What should you have in your own home if you get into a situation like this? So we're going to talk disasters tomorrow. What you need to know from that healthy perspective between 8:30 and 9 o'clock right here on Top Story, and of course Better Health with Trip Family Medicine. We do it every Wednesday. Trip Family Medicine is located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office in Twin Falls. And of course, they're still looking for new patients, and they can often see you on the very same day. If you call in with an issue in the morning, they can often be looking at you in the afternoon and then even send you home sometimes feeling much better. Got a story I want to share with you quickly. There's a publication called the Christian Science Monitor. It's no longer in print, it's just exclusively an online service any longer, and I've been subscribing to it for years. It's a fairly liberal publication. I do this because I try and have a wide reading list between. I know a lot of people just want that confirmation of reading only what they believe in. I try and look at a lot of different subjects and a lot of different points of view in order to get something together for a show every day. Um, but this is a fairly, as I say, liberal newspaper. The headline in one of the stories that I got in my email inbox is this: the refugee milestone Obama doesn't want to talk about. And apparently that goal he had of bringing in 10,000 Syrian refugees by the end of the year, our country has already met that. We met it apparently at the beginning of this week. The writer, though, says even among those who support the resettlement of Syrian refugees in America, Monday's low-key announcement was hardly something to celebrate. Refugee and human rights advocates call it woefully insufficient given the dimensions of Syria's tragedy. The number is not just lower than what the U.S. is capable of handling, they say, but also well below what many American communities are prepared to welcome. Now, I don't know that you've got 100% agreement on this notion that we're all going to be welcoming. We obviously have seen that here on the local level. The writer says it's an achievement, in other words, that it satisfies few. I go back to what the Dalai Lama said during an interview when he was in Germany a couple of months ago. He said, you'd be better off setting up protected camps for these people in their own lands or neighboring lands because that culture difference is going to be a shock. Now, this is a man whose own country, Tibet, was taken over by the Chinese while he was still just a little boy, and he's been in exile most of his adult life. He's not just a political leader, he's a spiritual leader from there. But here's a guy who was known to be a holy man of some sorts, and likely very liberal. And here he is saying, no, you don't pick people up and move them to Germany, Italy, Greece, England, France, Sweden, Finland, Norway, the United States, Canada, or Australia. If you're really interested in helping these people out, you will build camps for them, large protected camps for them, in places around their own countries or in safe zones nearby their own countries, and you will protect them. But that will allow them, when things finally clear up in their native lands, to simply go home and start living all over together. But he said something really, I thought, prescient. He was asked about the 1 million or so refugees who arrived in Germany last year. And by the way, the Christian Science Monitor reports also in the very same edition, Germany's support for migrants is, quote, slowing down, unquote. Yeah, you think? After all of the stabbings and the gropings and the jihadist attacks, yeah, it turns out that most of the migrants who've been coming in, the argument was, well, they'll fill jobs that Germans won't take. But it turned out that most of the migrants who were coming in didn't even have skills to do that. So now they're all, and many of them got there and then felt they're literally being interviewed, and many of them claim that they feel they deserve the welfare. In other words, that they shouldn't have to work. Well, the Dalai Lama's point was, if you keep bringing them into Germany, then you will no longer have Germany. But you can't make most liberals understand what he was saying. Or if they admire him, they just say, well, he must have been tripping on LSD that day. Yeah, that's the ticket. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Electric cars may be on the way in record numbers. I've got a detail on that in just a few minutes. It must have been last winter. I had been asked to do a little video, farewell video. One of my old bosses in the radio business had moved on years and years and years ago, and he spent 20 years working at one of the most listened to radio stations in America, which is called KMOX Radio out of St. Louis. They're heard in about 40 states, longtime home of the St. Louis Cardinals. And he was retiring after, he'd threatened to do it for many, many years, but he was retiring after 40 some odd years of doing this. And so I was one of the people asked if I could do a little short video for his farewell. And I thought about how he had led his life. He had been a man who once walked point in Vietnam, and he also had worked with PSYOPs, throwing people out of helicopters. No. They would just fly around a couple of feet off the ground, and the guy would be blindfolded and wouldn't realize he was only being thrown 2 feet, but it would still make them talk. Then my old boss went into the media business, and he did that for many, many years, and very successful at it, I should point out, too, and just one of the people I respected the most in life. But he was always a bit of a daredevil and a risk taker. So I went up to the bridge, and I stood there with the bridge behind me and had this little video that I filmed for him where I talked about how he reminded me of the people who sometimes would jump off that bridge with parachutes, because I said there's a lot of risk-taking in that, and there's a lot of bravery involved. And then I was standing right next to the monument, Evel Knievel Monument, and I referenced that. It was a very cold winter morning. It must have been late December of last year. And I remember I wrapped up and I started to leave, and I noticed there's a whole series, the first time I'd really noticed them, of electric power charging stations for electric automobiles right there in the parking lot by the visitor center. And I remember taking a look at those, so I took a quick photograph. Now, I would think a lot of the people who come and jump off that bridge would likely be the type of people who would they're risk takers, but they're also of that sort of nature that they might actually drive an electric automobile. In other words, while they take some risks in life, they also like to chew granola and drive electric automobiles and wear a lot of hemp clothing. You get the picture of what they're like. So they would be coming to that parking lot and potentially charging up their electric automobiles. Plus, a lot of your other visitors who really like nature might be of the same background. So, if you're going to have an electric charging station in Twin Falls, I guess that would be the place. The problem is, if some of those granola chompers are coming from California, they really don't have anywhere in between where they could charge up their automobiles. However, big changes are coming. According to the Wall Street Journal, a writer named Christopher Mims says that within about a year, we're going to see a doubling of the battery power from about an average of 100 miles per trip to about 200 miles per trip. And he also points out across the country, some restaurant and grocery chains are also setting up these outside their shops because it takes half an hour to an hour to charge an automobile. That's just enough time for you to go in and eat a meal at that restaurant. See, get the picture? It's a great way to bring you in for the real business they do. And he says the cost of actually electric automobiles and hybrids is coming down. And he said within a few years, he said, you're going to see huge amounts of these automobiles sold and rolling along American roads. He said, despite what the critics say, it might be we're on the cusp of that happening where you're going to see, perhaps in another decade, electric automobiles outnumbering even the internal combustion engine on the highway. We have a caller with us. It's 947-64 right now. And you're up next. You're on KLIX.
Yeah, I've seen those. I guess they look like little ovals. And so one day I stopped by and saw that they were charging station. And the first thing that came to my mind was who paid to have them installed. And then immediately it came to my mind who pays for the electricity to charge those cars. And just kind of concerned me a little bit.
That's the next question. Do you have to have a debit card to pay for the electricity or cash? Or because I don't think anybody's giving the electricity away for free, right?
I don't know. I didn't stay long enough to look, but it was just a question that came to my mind. A debit card makes sense, yes. And then, everybody's all worried about oil and the damage of oil and stuff. I saw an image on Facebook yesterday, timing is everything, about the mines that they harvest the lithium out of are huge open pit mines compared to an oil rig, which only takes a couple of acres. And I don't think they really realize the environmental damage that electric cars actually do.
Well, I thank you much for the call too. Those lithium batteries, they're costly to dispose of when they're done with them, and they're costly to replace. When you buy this automobile, I would hope they're telling you up front what it's going to cost in a couple of years to replace that battery, because it's like, what? Are you kidding me? That's as much as my property tax was back in a high-tax Democrat state. But according to this guy writing in the Wall Street Journal, things are going to be getting much, much cheaper. Now, you still have to have a steady electrical supply to do this, and that means you're going to have to burn a lot of, those terrible, awful fossil fuels in order to generate it, because we still don't have enough in the way of solar panels and whirligigs and everything else to generate all of this, although they're working on that. But it does tell you that we could see a mix of these cars on the road to the point where every other automobile you're passing out on the interstate may end up being one of these electric automobiles. 10 minutes now from 10 o'clock. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. But that generation of that electricity, how's that taking place? Well, right now it's mostly coal-fired, and we're phasing that out. And certainly the wind doesn't blow all the time, and they wouldn't exist without taxpayer subsidy, along with the solar. That's all taxpayer subsidized. All of that stuff would disappear because it's not sustainable. They keep talking about sustainable development. It's a fraud, total fraud, and it's all part of this Agenda 21 that we have this global warming hoax. And since the United Nations came online, Alger Hiss was the first Secretary General, and he was later convicted as a communist spy. And all of the groups that were involved in the formation of the UN were Council on Foreign Relations. They were all internationalists and socialists. And so, but the whole energy deal, if we look at where the source comes from on all this, our power rates, when I came to Twin Falls quite a few years ago, I paid a penny and a half a kilowatt. And now we're up about 10 for the summer. And Idaho Power is having to spend millions of dollars for some new solar project someplace.
They don't have a choice in that either. These utilities are forced to do that.
Yeah, and they're forced to do it. And of course, the last trip I made to eastern Idaho, going and coming a couple days apart, there was no wind. The wind generators were not producing 1 kilowatt of anything. And so even if they produce part of the day, days like yesterday when there was hardly any breeze at all, they're not generating. So the sun doesn't shine 24/7, and certainly in the wintertime, we only have about 9 hours of sunlight, and most of that is during the middle of the day. So it's just a total fraud. 31,000 plus U.S. scientists are on record against man-caused global warming. And H.R. 1205 will get us out of the United Nations if we can get enough congressmen to have enough guts to stand up for this country and take us out of the UN, which is, of course, bringing on Common Core. It's bringing on the refugee program. I mean, all of our problems can be traced back now to the power source, which the elitists want this one world government, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of course, which creates regional government. So they all have a connection, and the elitists want world government, and the leaders in both parties seem to have the same agenda, and they've all either been bribed into it or forced into it. But Trump is a breath of fresh air, regardless of his weaknesses, and Hillary will totally destroy this country, what's left of it.
You're a regular listener to Glenn Beck, as I understand, right?
I didn't quite catch that, Bill.
You're a regular listener to Glenn Beck's show, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, not as much as I used to. Glenn is kind of gone off the deep end, I think. He's been a real, I don't know. I don't get the opportunity to listen to Glenn Beck as much as I do. I've read a lot of his books. I've followed a lot of his stuff. His promotion of the 5,000-year leap by Cleon Skousen was a fantastic work about the 28 principles of liberty. But, he's come out lately, against Trump and been very vociferous about it, and I've kind of lost a lot of credibility in him.
I suspect that the new novel he has out, well, it's of course jointly written, but the new novel he has out called Agenda 21 was likely started before Trump jumped into this race. But from what I understand, the book presents a very dystopian view of what the world will be like if we end up all, being subject to this plan from the United Nations.
Yeah, here's one sentence that I put together. Agenda 21 is implementing a global regime that will monitor, oversee, and regulate our planet's oceans, lakes, streams, rivers, aquifers, seabeds, coastlines, wetlands, forests, jungles, grasslands, farmlands, desert, tundra, and mountains, and our use of these resources to control us. And so it proposes plans for cities, towns, suburbs, villages, etc. It envisions a global scheme for healthcare, education, nutrition, agriculture, labor. In other words, it basically sets up a police state. I mean, this is why we've got to get out of the United Nations, expose the Agenda 21. And of course, I think San Francisco was where the United Nations was founded. And we had been under there. We haven't won a war since World War II because we've been fighting under UN control. And we can't finish the job because we have to stay involved. I mean, it's really treasonous that the things that have been going on for a good number of years. The other thing you talked about earlier, Bill, was the fact that our morality, our kids don't know what's going on. They have no direction anymore. The schools, since the early 60s when the Earl Warren Supreme Court took Bible reading and prayer out of public schools. I mean, it's just accelerating the attack on Christianity and the attack on our founding fathers and our founding documents. It's got to stop. But the people are pulling their kids out of public school, and because it's just getting a lot of gobbledygook. And of course, it's really a sad situation to see this country deteriorate to where it has today. And I'm not sure we can pull it out, but folks, we can't do it with Hillary in there, and that's for sure.
Very true. Thank you so much for the telephone call this morning too. That is to be noted that a lot of people, of course, are still looking. I listened yesterday to Kevin Sorbo's wife. Of course, he was the guy who played Hercules, and they're very devout Christians, and she's homeschooling their children. She had an interview that was posted at Daily Caller. And I was listening to that before the show yesterday morning, and she talks about the hurdles that they throw in front of people trying to homeschool children. The teachers' unions don't want it. School is big business in this country, and she can homeschool because her husband makes enough money in the acting business. He's a big enough star, maybe not a huge one, but a big enough star. She can stay home and do it. But in most families in this day and age, we've made it impossible for one parent to stay home and do something like that. That is the threat that we're dealing with. Also, I saw today, I didn't get to mention this, but a retired Air Force officer who served on the, is an assistant on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Tom McInerney, and he has jointly written a piece in the Washington Times today where he talks about how we don't have any U.S. military might left, and he said one way in order to bring that back, first of all, you're going to need a GDP between 3 and 6%, which we haven't seen in years. But in order to do that, he said, we have to become energy independent. Now, that would mean wind, solar, but it would also mean all of the oil that we can use, natural gas, every last opportunity we have to use our own energy, we have to do that. We can't even rely, he says, on Canada and Mexico. He says we have to lower corporate tax rates, bring investors back here, bring companies back here, because without manufacturing in this country, you see what won World War II was the assembly line. Detroit and Seattle with Boeing, they won World War II. And without that, we're simply just going to continue to see all of this erode. And the day will come when we won't be able to defend ourselves against all of these nefarious elites around the world. We've got news coming up at 10 o'clock from Fox, followed by Rush Limbaugh, of course. Bill Colley saying, God willing, if the creek don't rise, they'll allow me to come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Sean Hannity following the news at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Glenn Beck following 4 o'clock news. And then Dave Ramsey tonight right here on KLIX.